All right, so that last video was a little bit silly, but was my kind of attempt to simulate a client call. Obviously, it's not actually to the detail what a client call would be like, but some of the key parts are in there, and the idea of like getting through it quickly, ignoring certain concerns, consolidating other concerns, educating the client, building a little bit of rapport back and forth, and ultimately beginning this scoping process that we've been talking about right on the call, right with the client, figuring out the first phase and really getting the go ahead to feel like they've been already working with you, right? So even though I kind of went over the scoping in a way in that fake conversation video, I still want to go through the 4 sample projects, and I've made a little worksheet that might be useful when it comes to this very quick first scoping process that you do. Eventually, this should just be something quite automatic that will just happen in your head. But I made this video before and it felt a little nebulous. It felt like it would be a little hard to sink your teeth into something. So I wanted to make an actual worksheet that you can look at, and we'll kind of fire through quickly with each project. So starting with our first project, which is again our warehouse guy, new to developer, random guy with a business idea sort of thing. You saw in the video that I understood his overall project idea. I split it up quite quickly and explained to him where the main difficulties were going to be and what I would need to research for the first phase, and just set up immediately going into getting information from him and doing more research and getting the work going. So when it comes to our worksheet, we have in there, under the quick notes, rough notes, we have 1-line description of the project, some points in the client's words, and broadly describing the functionalities. The 1 line of this project would be visualizing warehouse data in some kind of web application, right? That's 1 line. Some points in the client's words, we don't have to go over that again. For research or first steps, we talked about that. I'm going to research the back end of this kind of warehouse scanning, and it'll probably take about a week and probably about $500. The bulk of the work, I laid that out by describing having to create the database and work on the scanning and work on the user interface and work on the admin system. I just kind of very broadly stated those to the client, and he doesn't need to know the details. He just needs to know that that's what the main chunk of the work will be. And then I kind of said, oh, and all that other stuff you want to do with the polishing and the exactness of, you want to see this kind of display and that kind of display. Okay, we'll move that into phase 3, or maybe some of it will get into phase 2 after. But either way, we don't have to talk about it now and waste time talking about it and get all sidetracked and confused. We can just focus on getting the research done, and from then we'll move into those other phases and they will be made much clearer. For budget and timeline on his project, I, again, could only really budget the first one, although I could allude to what the others would probably take or what the possible outcomes of phase 1 would be, so that I could at least predict to him where we would go. And then that gives the client so much confidence, because you know that either, no matter what you find out from the part you don't know, you know what will happen after. And the client feels very secure that they can just let you handle it. In this case, the client gave me like a specific budget number of like a few $1,000s, which is nebulous, but it is, okay, I assume like $3,000 to $4,000, which isn't very much. And I can't remember if I actually did in the video or not, but I would probably give a broad range of, oh, it could be between 3,000 and 20,000 or 3,000 and 50,000 or whatever. I'd probably give this range while I'm explaining some of the difficulty. And in any case, I kind of set that aside because we can just do this first 500 and then budget the rest, with the client knowing that his budget is kind of small. So we can work from it after we do the initial research. And frankly, in any case, even if we don't go ahead with the project or we don't work well together, the client will still benefit from that $500 research. They'll know what to do a lot more and come much more prepared to the next developer. Finally, with timeline with this, as I did in the video before, it could be nebulous, so I just timelined the first week of research, and after that, looking at probably a few months' work at least, along with plenty of testing. So moving on from that first example, which is probably the most complicated of the examples, into our special agent. So this is our CEO hires you and basically says, oh, work with my dev team. You're a specialist in this one small section. In my case, it would be mapping. And so I'd be working on the map in their project and doing some special functionality. So In this case, a lot less scoping needs to go on because the client isn't coming to you with some disorganized set of needs, or if they are, it's getting filtered through their existing developer team. So you just need to really hook in with the developer team. This worksheet is less useful and it's more important that you scope out internally how you're going to get it done and just follow along with the existing developer processes. That's going to serve you much better to reduce friction with the rest of the developer team. Make sure that you ask them about the practices that they need you to follow and just fit in with the team and go along, and you'll probably be fine. Our next example here is the My Small Business. So this is somebody in town or somebody an artist friend or something. Their business is starting to grow and they want a little website that will be designed nicely and connected to all their socials and help them just grow their business and have a bit of a presence online. For this, our scoping sheet actually is quite useful. It helps us break down what we really need. So again, let's go through it real quickly. So a one-line description of this project would be to build a nice, neat website for X person or business. Some points in the client's words might just be their description of what they need. If they mention social, if they mention a blog, if they mention a store, these kind of things would just go there. And a broad description of functionality is just built from that. So you need to describe something like, I need to make a website that's hosted and add a custom domain and make it design that the client will like. So for research or first steps, when we're describing to the client, that would be us talking with them and working with them to figure out their general branding and their general design. So going through a couple example websites that maybe they like out there, a couple templates of designs, and figuring out how we want to host their website, depending on how we're going to do that, whether it's some WordPress or totally custom or Wix or something like that, and getting the basics set up for them. So in my case, if it was a WordPress site, I'd get their basic hosting and their domain set up, make a WordPress site, that's pretty much it, and figure out the core design, and that would be the first phase. And the second phase would be implementing that design, putting it on their site, making it all look nice, making sure that it all works with their content and their branding and blah, blah, blah. And then phase 3 would be polishing everything, double checking everything, testing on mobile, adding Google Analytics, adding all the little social things that they might want, Instagram stories and stuff like that. So, breaking it into those pieces. And again, you can walk the client through that when you're talking to them, that's how you'll approach it, prioritizing what they feel is most important. If the Instagram stories are super important to them, then those could be done quicker. So for budget and timeline, we can create a very rough estimate of hours. I imagine setting up their hosting and going over the design is going to take a few hours with them. Then the second part of coding the whole thing depends on the complexity of the design, but we would put somewhere in there 20 to 50 hours, probably somewhere in there. And the polishing is going to be another 10, 15 hours. So those are just my guesses, and then I would price them accordingly. And bearing in mind how long that's going to take in terms of timeline. So the whole thing's probably going to be done in somewhere to 1 to 3 months, depending how quickly you can have the conversations. So those are just quickly how I would scope a project like this in my head while I'm talking to the client. Finally, we have this bureaucracy one. Now, the idea of this is there's an academic organization that's asked you to submit a proposal, a formal proposal for something that they're doing. So for something like this, a scoping sheet is going to be even more helpful because you're going to have to design a written proposal that's very formal and has everything broken down with budgets and timelines and technologies. And we will get deeper into this in the organizing section, exactly what you would need to figure out for this sort of thing. But core in this would be talking to whoever is your contact and trying to get as much information out of them as possible. What is the data that you're going to do? Who's the audience that you're going to be talking to? How long do they expect you to have? Do they have a budget in mind? You just need any guidelines at all to help keep you on the road. Otherwise, with this kind of project, a budget they could be expecting 80,000 and you only say 10,000, and it's so confusing. So to know a couple parameters of a project like this is really, really valuable. And then when it comes to actually scoping, again, going through our ref notes, I didn't really describe exactly what this project is, so we're not really going to do the descriptive part. But in terms of you wouldn't be actually proposing to the client to do a first bit of work, because that's not how these things work. Instead, you would be breaking down inside the proposal how these phases would go. So there might be an initial phase where you're talking to all the stakeholders, you're getting everybody's input, you're doing all the design pre-work and everything like that. The second phase where you're doing the core of the building and just going back and forth with questions on functionality, maybe a check-in once in a while with the client or whoever is your kind of like guidance person during the project. And then third, doing all the testing and the polishing again. That's making lots of time for that to happen on a project like this. When it comes to these more academic projects, you really want to leave lots of room for testing because they tend to have a lot of people involved and they all want to have a say in what's going on, and it makes everything much more difficult to test. So you want to create a lot more space on the back end for testing everything rather than how easy it would be when it's just one client. They just tell you what they like and what they don't like. And when it comes to the budget, you really should work from their suggestion if possible, and just break it down into pieces that way. So if their total budget is 80,000, then think, okay, I should probably charge like 5% for the initial phase, 60% for the second, and 35% or whatever for the last phase. It's a very easy way to just break it down in your head when you're working with big numbers and it's hard to figure out how much work it's actually going to be. For these kind of things, they're really just looking for a broad proposal so they can sign a contract and then they'll just do it with you. And they don't really care if their budget is a little off or something like that. They want to get it done. So hopefully this has been a little bit helpful in taking some of our ideas of phasing and breaking it into some chunks when it comes to actual clients. This is something you will learn to do very quickly, but just having these three phases in mind and applying these three phases to budgets and timelines can help you be flexible with clients, work with different kinds of clients in different kinds of situations, and ultimately give you a lot of confidence and a lot of freedom in how you're going to approach your own projects.